Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Jason up, New 80's Revolution, down here in the cave, and we're gonna talk, do a video. Let's see. Anything to update you? Probably not. Probably not a lot going on. No. Shipping out stuff, as I said. We'll make some room back there. We'll do the video store, whatever. When we first started the channel, I talked about how difficult it was to almost how difficult it was to explain what I was even trying to say or trying to do with the channel. We always talked about a feeling, right? A feeling of childhood, a feeling of the 80s. And nobody we could never put it into words, right? It was always just this unexplainable feeling. And many of you have written and said, no, I know exactly the feeling that you're talking about, but I can't explain it. I can't explain the feeling of a sleepover in 1986. I can't explain that feeling. We just can't do it. And as I've, even before the channel, there would be things that would just randomly remind me of childhood or of the 80s. And they were exclusive to me in that moment. They were hard to explain. They weren't symbolic, or not, they weren't commonly symbolic. It wasn't like, oh, Chuck E. Cheese reminds me of the 80s. What's up? The disturbances of fatherhood. I guess they don't, the red light above the staircase that says, recording, just like Uncle Jesse had on Full House. I guess they just don't see it. Anyway, throughout life, and especially throughout the life of the channel, there would always be these things that reminded me of childhood or the 80s. And like I was saying, they aren't universally known. Like I was saying, it's not like, oh, Chuck E. Cheese reminds me of the 80s. Oh, watching G.I. Joe reminds me of the 80s. Yes, of course it does. But what about those things that are odd? What about those things that are obscure? What about those things that might be exclusive to us? There's one of those things on this list that I 100% guarantee you is exclusive to me and does not come across anybody's brain ever. I'll save that one for a bit. So these are just a random list of things that instantly transport me back in time. Number one is something that we talked about when I did one of my vlogs when I was mowing the lawn. The sound of a lawnmower brings me back to childhood. Why? I don't know. I think because you were a kid, you'd been alive 8 years, and you probably, think about it, if you're 8 years old, you don't remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You barely remember 7. You start remembering at 8. At least my memories really start kicking in at 8. So I could say that I was 8 years old when I first heard a lawnmower, right? That's not true, but it's probably the first time that it actually registered as something. And when I think of lawn mowing, it's not the smell of cut grass. People have told me that reminds them of childhood. It's not the smell, it's the sound. Because, people who've now become, old men, who now I have become, we mow our lawns on the weekends sometimes starting at 9 a.m. That's my cutoff point as far as earliness, if I'm saying that right. I won't mow my lawn sooner than 9 a.m. and I won't mow my lawn after 8. There's some moron down the street who mows his lawn at 9 p.m. And he's like 80 years old, so I don't get it. But the sound of a lawnmower, so the 9 a.m. summer, you might be just getting out of bed. We didn't have a lot of we didn't have a lot of central air conditioning back then, right? So you had your hot house, so you had your windows up, and laying in bed on a summer at 9 a.m., getting ready to get up and hearing the lawnmower going was definitely a common thing, and it still gets me today. The school, we live by a high school, the school cuts their lawn. They have no rules. They cut their lawn 7:30 in the morning. And sometimes in the summer, I can hear the faint lawnmower going, which I like. It's kind of a lullaby. I'm not like, who's mowing their lawn this early? I'm like, that's all right. I can fall asleep to that. McDonald's is an instant reminder, not just the food, in fact, not the food at all. The advertising for McDonald's, the golden arches, reminds me of childhood. I don't think we see a lot of McDonald's commercials anymore. I mean, I don't see any commercials anymore because of our lack of cable or satellite. So I don't really see commercials anymore. So I don't know if they even do McDonald's commercials anymore. But just driving by a McDonald's and seeing the M, seeing the design of the roof. Now, a lot of McDonald's have changed. If you have been into your local McDonald's lately, you'll become depressed, as I do. It's all automated. There's at a time when a counter was full of employees, maybe even 5 or 6 registers going at a time. There's down to one, and she doesn't. They don't post there. They don't stand there constantly. There's one register in my McDonald's and 2 kiosks where you order yourself. If you don't know how to do that, you stand at the register for about 3 minutes until somebody notices that you're standing there. So gone are the days of, person standing, hi, welcome to McDonald's. How can I take your order? Those people are gone. They're in the back. They're working in the back. The register is almost like a prop now. Regardless of that, the M for McDonald's is an instant knock back to childhood. Probably, and there's a general reason why I think these things are such reminders. You'll see, for the most part, in fact, for all parts, they haven't changed. They haven't modernized. They haven't become swallowed up by pop culture. McDonald's is still called McDonald's. It's not named after some other corporation that bought the rights to it. A Big Mac is still called a Big Mac. It's not. It hasn't had its name changed. They've stayed the same. The sounds of lawnmowers have not changed. The M, the golden arches for McDonald's, has not changed. Bowling alleys is on the list. The inside of a bowling alley will immediately take me back to childhood. I spent a ton of time bowling all throughout my life and was such a huge fan of it as a kid, over the top fan of bowling as a kid, that the bowling alley, the interior of a bowling alley, has not changed over the years, for the most part, and it's an instant flashback to childhood. Being in a bowling alley, again, really makes me feel like a kid, because it hasn't changed much. Bicycles are certainly a trip back in time for me. Sadly, my kids don't ride bikes. They both know how to ride a bike, but they don't ride bikes. Probably because they don't play with any kids in the neighborhood, and so they don't hop on their bike and go cruising down 12 houses down to play with so-and-so in the backyard for 6 hours. They don't do that. At this age, they certainly don't ride their bikes up to the 7-Eleven to get slushies, as I did at 8 or 9 years old. They're not going to do that either. And so they don't have a use for their bike because they don't go anywhere. We did try buying, like family bikes and riding bikes around, but Um, I have grown to realize that the seats of bicycles are horribly uncomfortable, and I would need one of those big fat old men seats that I would have to have that seat on my bike, because bike seats are terrible. I also don't like mountain bikes. If I was to get a bike, I would probably get it more of an adult-sized BMX bike. I don't like mountain bikes; they're too high. I never liked 10 speeds as a kid. I thought they were too high. I liked lower bikes. But regardless of that, the concept of bikes is still a major throwback to childhood. Swing sets. Swing sets certainly bring me back in time. And not the over-the-top, top shelf, high-class swing sets that are made of wood and have a climbing wall and a fort on top. Those are ridiculous. Would I have wanted one as a kid? Yeah, sure. But I don't even know if they had them back then. But I'm talking about the aluminum or metal or whatever swing sets that we still see. We still absolutely see them. They're still everywhere. They usually have a slide. They have a couple of swings, and then they either have some rings. Remember the rings? Or they would have like this U-shaped bar that you would just do whatever on, maybe flip around it. Or they would have the cage of death. And the cage of death was like this 2-seater swinging bench thing that, man, you would get that thing going and you would almost knock the swing set over, or you'd almost flip over, because you figured out that the only way to make it go fast and high was to stand on it. And you could rock it back and forth. So we would stand on it, and 2 kids would be in the seats, and we would be terrifying them. And in reality, we're also in danger standing on this thing. But I see them everywhere still. Now, if you had cheap parents, as mine were, lazy parents, they didn't cement the swing set into the ground, because they're going to move eventually, They're not going to swing. They're going to cement it in. So it's just sitting there. And as you get pumping, as you get going, the whole swing set lifts up. And you just don't realize how close to death you actually are. Of course, we would jump off the swings. That was always fun. And I think there was always like this, this urban legend of going around the swing set if you got pumping high enough with the swings. I don't think I've ever seen a kid do it. I think I knew a cousin who had a friend who had a mailman whose third nephew did it. But I never saw it. I never saw anybody actually go around the swing set. Swing sets, major blast of the past. The crayons and coloring books, and especially the smell of crayons is an instant flashback. I think crayons and coloring books were a very simple go-to present for everybody in your family when it came time to buy you a present. But they haven't changed. Crayons haven't changed. They've come up with more ridiculous named colors, but crayons haven't changed. They smell the same. They're probably made exactly the same. They have paper on them. And for some kids, they taste the same, but that's a different story. But they've never changed. They haven't changed. Coloring books haven't changed. There's still a drawing that isn't colored in, that you have to now color in. And I love it. And isn't it amazing that the things that haven't changed still, give us those good feelings? Because they have, television sets don't give me good feelings today because they've completely transformed into something, futuristic looking in comparison to our memories of our television. So, the things that haven't changed, do it for me. In the food category, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and Doritos. As soon as I see or taste that stuff, it's an instant trip back in time. For forever, my kids would call any kind of soda Coke. So if they want, if we had like orange soda in the fridge, they'd be like, "Oh, can I get some Coke?" It was always Coke. But soda and Doritos are just instant trips back in time. Garages. Ladies and gentlemen, garages bring me back to childhood. Probably because I played in mine. I would build forts in my garage. Our garage was clean enough. It wasn't, so there's 2 types of garage. Well, there's 3. There's garages that you can do absolutely nothing in because they're loaded with your dad's, 1963 Camaro and all of his, stuff and tools and parts. And you can do nothing in the garage. There's garages that are clean, but you're not really living space. And then you have the garages that are completely, I guess remodeled or drywalled. There's some carpeting on the floor, and they're like an indoor-outdoor room. I had a few of those in my family. I never had one. My grandparents had one, and it was a blast. You'd sit out there in the summer, and no matter how hot it was, you were fine. And they'd put a couch and I remember a couch and a love seat was out there. It was a big garage. They'd have a couch and a love seat and a table, like a picnic, like a round plastic table with round chairs, and you just sit and eat. And it was great. They had the screen that came down, the screen door, and you'd get a nice breeze, according to your grandmother, and you would kind of hang out in the garage. I loved it. But in my childhood garages, I would build forts. And it was great, the garage doors open when the friends are over, you're running in and out of the garage, you're doing your thing. It's fantastic. Sheds would fall into that same category. Sheds, I always had the fantasy of turning a shed into a fort, but our sheds in all of our houses that we ever had were full of, dad stuff. We have a shed that's full of dad stuff. It's not used as a fort. But as a kid, and again, it hasn't hit my kids, but as a kid, a shed always was an opportunity for a fort. Let's make that a fort. We can sleep in it one night. This is going to be great. Never really worked out that way, but just the image of a shed is a trip back in time. Just the image of Pac-Man. I know there's a ton of video game images and Atari, but the image of Pac-Man on a t-shirt, anything, instant trip back in time. Just that yellow, Pac-Man, immediately gone. It's. In fact, I probably should have a Pac-Man tattoo somewhere, because it is just such an iconic image that immediately transports me back in time. The final one, because I think my rice is burning. Here we go. This is one that I guarantee none of you have thought of. And I want you to leave yours below, because maybe I'll do a follow-up show and talk about all of yours. But when I was a kid, I used to love the driveway because it was raised up a little bit. And the edge of the driveway in the grass was a little bit of a step down. Now, I don't mean a step down where you'd fall, but it was kind of a smooth transition from the beautifully asphalted, sealed driveway to the grass. It was like this, it was just this little difference. And it sloped down like this, all the way down. And I loved that look as a kid, and I love it as an adult. I don't have it right now, but when I get my driveway refurbished or refinished or whatever it's called, I'm going to make sure that they kind of slope it. And I remember always getting my bike tire. If you're riding your bike on the driveway and you're turning around and you're just doing kind of loops in your driveway, if you catch your bike tire in that little slant, you got to re-steady or else you're going down. But I love that look, and it's an instant trip back to childhood. The slightly edged driveway where the grass doesn't grow over it, and all you really got to do is mow. You don't even have to really use your edger. I mean, you could for a tighter look, but the driveway is nicely slanted before it hits your grass. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, then I'm absolutely insane. Those are the obscure things that remind me of childhood in the 80s. Put yours down below, and I'll talk about yours on a future show. Thanks for hanging out with me. Good night now.